The fact that people would get offended over me calling a peach-colored crayon skin-colored is beyond me. The fact that I would have to be so politically correct that I could not call a crayon that is clearly a nude color for a white person because it's peach, it's the color of my skin, that I would call it skin-colored. I'm racist. I'm a terrible person, that I'm a part of the problem because I would call it skin colored. This week I uploaded a short about a book that we had to return to the library because it had crude, crass humor that I didn't want to be reading to my 2-year-old. It was about a crayon who was joking about I'm naked, saying I'm naked to strangers' doors on Halloween instead of trick or treat because apparently he didn't know what to say and all these crayons were trying to learn what to say. So they're like, Merry Christmas, you know, the Happy American Cheese Month, I'm naked. And every single time this skin-colored crayon was saying I'm naked, right? And I was just like, this feels like grooming to me. If this got in the hands of the wrong person, you know, somebody you think you can trust, or reading it to your kid, they could easily be like, oh, that's really funny. Oh, do you want to play this game? You know, not everyone's trustworthy. This is how grooming starts, right? It's those inappropriate jokes. I had interactions with a priest who was later removed from being a priest or suspended or whatever it is that they did. I don't even remember. I didn't follow it that closely. But he was texting me really inappropriate jokes, and I would show my husband. I'm like, this is really weird. And what ended up happening was one day, one of the husbands of one of the other women that he was texting this way showed up at church and punched him. And it was this whole debacle, right? So grooming happens in this capacity. And this is something that we can be pretty unified as a collective, as society. We should not be okay with people telling inappropriate jokes to little kids. I think jokes about being naked in a book that's written by an adult is weird. I don't think it's appropriate. But instead of seeing like, hey, oh yeah, that is kind of a weird thing. That is how grooming begins, with these really kind of off-color jokes with crude, crass humor. You know, that's how grooming begins. It opens the door to be able to talk about nudity. It opens the door to talk about those types of things. So instead of that, everybody got up in arms over me calling a peach-colored crayon skin-colored, who was declaring I'm naked, who's supposed to be being viewed as skin-colored because they're naked. So I think that it's interesting in reading Promoting Racism in Bill Donahue's book, War on Virtue, how the ruling class is preventing people from being able to pursue the American dream in order, like trying to keep people from success, basically, that they promote racism, that it's coming from within. These elitists in government basically saying, oh, white people are terrible and black people, you know, need to be promoted, and all of these different pieces. This chapter focused on a lot of what happens in education, a lot of what happens at colleges, schools, you know, critical race theory, all of these different things that have been coming into play. Ibram X. Kendi is one of the founders of CRT, right, of critical race theory. And one of the things that he said was, when I see racial disparities, I see racism, which I think is interesting. And one of the other pieces that gets noted in here is how when people talk about the academic advantage that white people have, or if there is an academic disparity, that to acknowledge that, to say, hey, you know, African Americans or Black Americans are further behind in education, that's somehow racist, instead of just acknowledging that reality and saying, okay, like, that's a problem. How do we help to improve that? How do we bridge that gap? What do we need to put in place? I think a lot of this chapter focused on how a lot of elite government, people who say that they are for African Americans, for Black Americans, I don't know what the proper term is nowadays. I would say Black Americans. I definitely agree with this whole idea of, you know, it's Raven Simone talked about, you know, she's the third generation in America. She's not an African American. There are people who come over from Germany and they're first generation. They're not German Americans, they're just American. Why should they be called African Americans? I agree with this. So you know, I'm a white American, you're a Black American. Okay, like, but to have these Black Americans to be somehow at a disadvantage. It's like, how do we bridge that gap? But instead, the ruling class is saying, oh, that's racist to say that. There's this denial of reality. It goes right along, honestly, to me with the trans agenda, being like, no, they're not a man. They identify as a woman. It's like, no, they don't identify as there being an academic gap. And so we're just not going to talk about it. We're going to label it something bad so that you actually can't even talk about it. But if you can't talk about it, how can there be improvement? Have you witnessed those toxic family dynamics where you can't talk about what's actually going on and everything is just swept under the rug? And if you do bring something up, suddenly you're a god-awful person that can't do anything right? Like, have you witnessed that before? Do you agree that that's a toxic mentality for a family to hold? That if you do have issues, if there are shortcomings, that you should be able to talk about them and then reach some sort of compromise or put something in place to help bridge that gap of what's going wrong? Isn't that the whole purpose of communication and community and family ultimately? We are all children of God. There is a huge desire. I mean, Martin Luther King Jr., there was a desire for all children of God being deserving of equality, justice, and liberty. So when we dive into those types of things, we go into this idea, that Black people can't be racist. There was a few years back, Dr. Aruna Kilanani spoke at Yale in 2021 about race relations, right? She is a psychiatrist and forensic psychoanalyst. She came and gave a talk about, what was the talk called? I had looked it up to look. Oh, and I don't even have it open. But the quote that Bill put in his book from this is the cost of talking to white people at all, the cost of your own life as they suck you dry. There are no good apples out there. White people make my blood boil. I had fantasies of unloading a revolver into the head of any white person that got in my way, burying their body and wiping my bloody hands as I walked away, relatively guiltless, with a bounce in my step, like I did the world a favor. When you have people in places of authority speaking these types of words, you can see why Charlie Kirk's assassination was celebrated, why his murder was celebrated. As if I was doing the world a favor. Now, I will admit, I could definitely see hypocritical actions occurring on the right, especially when it comes to the death penalty, right? Like, I'm doing the world a favor by killing this person who has committed a heinous act, and we're removing them from the world so that they can't do it again. I'm Catholic. I don't believe in the death penalty. I believe that every life is worthy of dignity and respect, and there are measures that can be put in place to ensure safety of those who are around them. But as it stands, right, this idea of just because they're white, if a white person got in my way, like burying their body and walking away guiltless with a bounce in my step, who would speak that way? I do not have any fantasies of killing anybody. It's like such a foreign concept to me. I don't quite understand how somebody could get to that point. But I think that in this example that I had with my short, it's almost like people just look for issues. It's like if there's something for them to agree with, they'll just either be quiet or they'll find something else in something that they could agree with and find a way to argue. It's so toxic. It's such a terrible mentality. You can't be in a relationship with somebody that's like that. And one of the quotes that I put quotations around, Bill says that the ruling class is essentially embracing racism in the name of fighting racism. There are some of these statistics that are just going highly disregarded, and how it's all essentially based on lies. How the majority of Black people back in right after the civil rights movement, it was something like 81% of Black people felt that life was improving for them, whereas now it's down to something like 54%. I should have these all written down, but you know me. It's 81% of Americans said that racial and ethnic discrimination is still a big problem right now in 2020. But in 1964, the year of the Civil Rights Act, 81% of Americans believed that life was improving for Blacks. So, you have these opposite numbers, right? It's both 81%. That's why I got it mixed up. 81% believe that life was improving for Black people back in 1964. And now in 2020, 81% of Americans say that racial and ethnic discrimination was a big thing. But a lot of this is based on a lie. That when George Floyd died, this was one of the things that Bill mentions in here. You know, it says there was a African American or a Black American columnist for the Wall Street Journal, Jason Riley, and he wrote that the protests that followed Floyd's death rested on two assumptions. The first is that Floyd, career criminal and drug addict, was somehow representative of Black America, which is not only false, but insulting. The second is that police acted out of racial animus, which has never been proven. This is what happens when racial identity becomes the centerpiece of politics and public life in a multicultural society. Floyd had served, so that's the end of what he wrote. Floyd had served 9 separate jail sentences for crimes ranging from armed robbery to drug dealing. And it was concluded that Derek Chauvin, it was not a hate crime. The judge who ruled on it was a left-wing Black American, Keith Ellison. He was the judge, or the attorney general in charge of the prosecution of Chauvin, He said, I wouldn't call it a hate crime because with a hate crime, there's explicit motive and there's and bias. And there's no evidence that Chauvin factored in George Floyd's race as he did what he did. And so with all of this, there was all this outrage, and it was essentially just based on a lie. There was no evidence that showed that it was because he was Black. You had a man who, if you attempt to use as the poster person of Black America, is insulting. Someone who served 9 jail sentences, someone who was a drug addict, and inspiring over 600 attacks on 220 American cities. And so you take these, you talk about disinformation, you talk about all these things. We're all seeing such highly different realities right now with our algorithms and everything else. So much is being fed. I had a friend over the other day who's very left-wing, and there was a part of me that was like, we should trade phones. I want to see what your Instagram feed looks like. Let me view the type of stuff you're taking in, and then how about you view pulling and you can view the type of stuff I'm pulling in, which all of my stuff is like homesteading and having lots of kids and all these different things. But Riley in this Wall Street Journal column compared the media's reaction of George Floyd to Darrell Brooks, which I hadn't even heard of Darrell Brooks, if I'm honest. But Brooks is a Black man who was charged with driving his car through an annual Christmas parade in 2021 in Wisconsin. He killed 6 people, all of whom were white, including an 8-year-old boy. And Riley wrote, given the suspect's history of posting messages on social media that called for violence against white people and praising Hitler for killing Jews, you'd think that his race and the race of his victims would be relevant to reporters. Race is all anyone would be talking about if a white man had slammed his vehicle into a parade full of Black people. Right? Like, if a white man, he would be absolutely condemned, and it would be totally focused on race. This white person hates Black people, but because a Black person is not capable of racism, according to a modern day, ruling class society, what the information that they're feeding, it's not possible. It's not possible that that Black person could have been racist because he's not a minority. So I did look up the definition of racism, right? With was it Kendi's statement of whenever I see racial disparity, I see racism. What is racism? Okay, racism by definition is prejudice, discrimination, or antagonism by an individual, community, or institution against a person or people on the basis of their membership in a particular racial or ethnic group, typically one that is a minority or marginalized. So it doesn't have to be. I think that's one of the reasons that a lot of people say, well, Black people can't be racist because, they can't be racist against white people because white people aren't a minority. They're not marginalized, right? But you still have poor white people or disabled white people. You still have marginalized sects of white people. But as a whole, apparently you just can't be racist to them. But that's only a typical thing. So this whole social idea, the church obviously thoroughly condemns racism, judging people based on their skin tone. And, you know, as we talked about in chapter 1 here, the whole concept of fatherless homes, what was it, 75% of Black American households are without a father figure. This is substantial. It's important. This is like why turning to God is so important, because he is our father. He is stable. He is consistent. There is so much love and goodness that can be reaped from that relationship, that if we secure our hearts in God, so much can just be healed. And I was thinking about Charlie Kirk's death, and just the next chapter is about devaluing the family. And I just think about the importance of a mother and a father, and how a lot of that is even being removed with the LGBTQ agenda, right? Or movement, whatever you want to call it. Because you're trying to say, well, a kid doesn't have to have a mom and a dad. They can have like 2 moms or 2 dads, or hey, let's give them to this, 3-man throuple. I was reading this happened, 2 years ago or last year? It happened in 2024. William and Zachary Zulak, they pled guilty to multiple charges, including incest, child molestation, and sexual exploitation of children. They had adopted 2 sons, and I didn't know I was going to feel emotional about this. They adopted 2 sons and apparently like raped them repeatedly, and ultimately ended up getting caught and pled guilty to these charges. And now they're each spending 100 years behind bars. I'm not sure that there was a way around it. I don't know. I had read another somewhat similar situation where they were actually raping and recording and then distributing the content, where they had adopted a child. And anyway, so you have, this whole idea of, oh, well, they don't need a mother and a father. There was another situation that I had encountered that I just felt terrible about. We were at the aquarium, and there was a little boy who was having an absolute total meltdown, screaming inconsolably for a very prolonged period of time. And he was sitting with 2 men, and they just didn't know what to do. So I went over and I was just trying to help. And I was just like, why don't you hold him and hug him, and just that'll help him. Maybe he can feel your breath and this and that. And this kid there was no consoling him. There was nothing anybody could do. And these men just they didn't know. And so then a woman walks up, and I was like, oh, and the little boy saw it, and it was Mom. And he went. And looking back, I was like, oh my gosh, I genuinely think that I just told that little boy to go into the arms of someone who was abusing him. Looking at how that whole situation played out, how a mother, I don't even know. I'm not I don't know. It was a very abnormal situation, and it was so hard to witness. And then just looking back at it, knowing what very well could have been the case on why he was so upset, and the way that the man was behaving, and just all of it around it. It was really unfortunate and very, very scary. And so anyway, so this whole concept of oh, we can just remove whether they have a mother and a father, it doesn't matter. But at the end of the day, it does. It has a huge impact on people's development and how they're stabilized, and all these different pieces. So as it stands in this chapter, back to race, Bill has a section here called "Liberal Racism is Holding Blacks Back." And basically this idea of not allowing Black people to grow, and that they are essentially holding them back from reaching their potential. One of the things that I've talked about more in my private life is, one day I will come into an amount of money that will allow my husband and I to do something with it. We will likely start some sort of nonprofit. I don't know what exactly we want to do, but one of the things that we are passionate about is going to an underserved community, like a town, right, and helping fix it up so that everyone can enjoy it, so that we can leave a good mark on the community and help improve it. And in talking to one of my friends about this, I said one of the things that when that day comes, I do not want to come in and be this white savior, right? Going to a, cause here in Kalamazoo, there is a really rundown side of town. And it's like, I would love to be able to go into that community and like work with them, get things so that they're like, right, talk to them, figure out what their issues are, figure out what they want. Because I believe that community knows. I think that they know what they need. They don't need me to come in and be like, oh, you need this, you need that. I know of someone who had gifted a really nice speaker system to a church, and then they weren't using it, and the person was a little upset about it. But I don't know that the church necessarily wanted it or needed it, or if they had somebody with the capabilities to run a system that was quite like that. And so you have all of these different dynamics at play where it's like, well, I don't just want to come in and be this like, oh, I, have all this money and we're going to get this town to a place that you guys will like. Like, let's fix up this particular thing, when really they're like, no, what we actually need, if I'm like, oh, we need, your guys' grocery stores run down with a gas station. Like, let's fix those things up. Well, they're over here and they're just like, we really needed a playground, or the kids would have loved a splash pad, or, we needed this other thing. It's like talking to the community and figuring out what it is that they need from their own words. And I think that that's something that that the ruling class right now does a terrible job at. They aren't sitting there being like, what do you need? They're sitting there being like, you essentially are underprivileged. You are a victim. People are not looking out for your best interest, and essentially there's no hope. I truly believe that there is a sin against hope happening right now, that 81% of Americans can say, there are these huge bridges and there's just, I don't know how we're going to move forward. You have to trust. You have to, and only God can give that. That grace comes from God to say, how can we come back together as a society? How can we come back together to work off of each other's talents? And what can we do to bridge these gaps? How can we address them well without there being a ton of anger and insults and whatever else? I mean, right, even just me saying the thing about the mother and father situation and whatever, how it's coming from all these different angles, that this concept just isn't even important. It's being whitewashed. You can't talk about the reality of the situation, that clearly, I think it's like, there's a reason that it takes a man and a woman to make a baby. Those two are then bonded and not able to be separated in a very unique way. It takes a man, that child needs both of those individuals whose DNA they now possess, right? And so to just try to eliminate that and say that it's not, and clearly there are going to be the tragic situations. Everyone wants to talk about the outliers, but let's talk about the majority for a little bit. Let's just talk about the majority. Let's talk about the typical situation instead of finding those things to argue about. I'm gonna call a crayon that's pretending to be naked and is claiming that they're naked skin colored. Why wouldn't I? Maybe he should have made the crown black or brown. Why aren't you mad at the author for making it a nude, like a peach colored? That's the nude color. If you look up the color nude, it's gonna be a peach color. Okay, and you're gonna get mad and say that that's racist. Okay, why isn't brown called nude? I don't know. Take it up with Crayola. Those darn racists. Come on. People are just looking for things to get offended about for the sake of being offended. And it just has to stop. You can't make progress with that. You can't get anywhere with that. If you're trying to have a conversation and somebody says something that's politically incorrect, and suddenly, this whole conversation has to be shut down. Anything that they say is now irrelevant. You're not going to get very far. And you are making it very clear that your goal is not community. Your goal is not to find cooperation and cohesion and a path forward. Your goal is division, and division does not come from God. That is not a godly attitude to have. And so if you're displaying those types of characteristics, you are being influenced by the devil. You are allowing temptation of pride, and you're allowing temptation and the sin of What would that be a sin of? I mean, I think it's a sin against hope, first and foremost. I mean, I would probably be more likely to sin against hope and feeling that there was not going to be a path forward. But, I mean, right, a sin against liberty, justice, all of those things, a sin against dignity. I think that God always intended for us to live in unity and union with each other. I think it's really unfortunate when division wins, when there's just so much at stake and all people want to do is get offended. Like, find a way to laugh, find a way to find the heartbeat of the message that somebody is saying, and then go from there. Like, that's all that you can really do. So as I said, next week we're talking about how the ruling class is devaluing the family, which I'll probably revisit a couple of these pieces that I touched on today in regard to, right, the importance of the family unit and how much that has disintegrated and is being pushed as abstract and obsolete and unimportant, which I don't even feel like I need to read a chapter about that one to have my very fully formed opinions about it. But perhaps Phil will offer some statistics or other pieces that I can feed into and learn from in how it actually applies, because I just feel like so much of what gets spoken is more of a narrative, and it's like viral attempts at extreme language, because only extreme language goes viral, and it's like just trying to get noticed and get the word out there and whatever, like the way that the communication goes about. I don't know. So as it stands, glad that you were here. If you are reading the book with us, it is War on Virtue by Bill Donahue. The purchase link is in the description, or you can find it at your local library. And I look forward to seeing you again next Sunday. God bless you. Look forward to talking to you soon.